Well, that was that happened. Welcome back to Terrible Lizards. I am your host, Justin MacArthur. Today we're going to be making a wide number of gelatin tests, and as you've probably seen from the title of the video, not all of them were successful. This first one we're just making basic lime jelly. Now we're going to be making a second version, which is using the port wine jelly. We're going to be making it with gelatin powder, and we're going to be cooking it on the stove. This is a way of making a more firm recipe that is closer to a jelly baby mix. I've actually based this on another YouTube video that's out there. I will link that. That will be coming up on the top right hand side of your screen very shortly. You can see that's starting to thicken up. We don't want it to actually boil. I think I may have actually boiled it slightly there. You don't really want to boil gelatin. It'll still set, but it won't set as firmly. And there we go, straight into our patty pan. And we're going to leave that to sit for a little bit before we put that in the fridge. And then we will do a comparative test of the two using our two little stegosaurs. And you can see immediately that one of these is firmer than the other. You can see that the patty pan with our jelly baby mixture is much firmer and in fact sticks to the bottom of our stegosaur when we try and remove it from the pan. So that's just jelly. This is much closer to a jelly lolly. So this will be our first and I think only successful gelatin test of the entire video. It was not a productive couple of days, but there we go. One jelly lolly made of gelatin and port wine jelly. So now we're going to move on with our friend, I'm going to call my friend Chadwick here, the brachiosaur, and we're going to make 5 different kinds of gelatin. We're making Mackenzie's gelatin powder, Queen gelatin powder, Robertson's pure gelatin, Morinaga gelatin powder, and Mackenzie's gelatin leaves. I think I got those in the right order. Once again, we're mixing this in cold water, then we're putting it on the stove in hot water, and then into the fridge. In this case, we're actually putting it into the freezer so that it will set slightly quicker. Now here we're using Queen gelatin powder. That one you pour into boiling water, and we're going to use our superhuman stirring strength to stir that in before adding some more cold water. And we're going to let that set a little bit in the jug and then pour it straight into the gelatin tray alongside our other gelatin. Then I'm going to break everything in the kitchen and put that in the freezer. We're going to now work with the Robertson's Pure Gelatin, which we're going to stir straight into the water. We're going to add, how many teaspoons? Yeah, sure, 5. That sounds good. Well done, Justin. Yeah, good job. And once again, we're doing that on the stove. While we're waiting, because there's a lot of waiting in this episode, we're going to make a headset mic for Chadwick. You can make that at home yourself. All you need is a paperclip and a small toy dinosaur. Now we're going to get on with the Morinaga gelatin powder. I really like this one. It comes in a very cute package. You've got the individual packets themselves, and then you've got this little recipe book here. This is probably why the packet was hideously expensive.
Okay, oishi, that's tasty. Let's see if it's oishi.
I didn't quite know the recipe here, so I started with boiling water like we did with the Queen gelatin powder, added in the gelatin before adding in cold water and then pouring it into the tray. Now we're going to be doing gelatin leaves, which are a slightly different process. So they involve soaking in cold water. You can see they've got this beautiful stained glass kind of gloss to them. We're going to soak them in cold water until they're soft, drain off that cold water, and then we're going to cook them on the stove in the same way as the other gelatin. Now you might use these sorts of gelatin leaves to stick something together as a gelatin-based adhesive. There's a whole bunch of different uses for different kinds of gelatin. I won't be going into that in this video because I haven't really explored them, so I would just be reading what I've Googled about the various uses of gelatin leaves. Beyond this video, I haven't really gone into the many varied uses of gelatin, so... We've spilt a little bit there. Hopefully that won't impact the final results. Spoilers, it won't matter to the final results. What's going to stuff this up is much more dramatic than spilling a little bit. But what have we been doing with the excess gelatin? That's a great question, Chadwick. Let's look at the big saucepan there.
Obviously, we want to be as realistic as this guy here. But to start with, to have an effective mold, we're going to use this bit.
See if you can remember all the dinosaurs on the front of that packet, because that will come in handy later when we're trying to figure out what on earth we've made. So those are all setting in the freezer, and they're looking pretty decent now that they're setting there. I sure hope nothing bad happens, like my freezer being broken.
Gelatin molds.
Oh dear.
You can see that they have deteriorated a little bit in the fridge. We are going to be testing them a number of ways today. So the first is seeing how they hold their form. So we're just going to try pressing them out of the mold. Oh dear, I think we might be about to fall at the first hurdle here. Do we have any? Well, we've got one. What one was that one? That was this one here.
It's very difficult for me to convey just how gross this is.
So what I've done is I've left these in the fridge too long, which means that I've completely stuffed up that first test. So I might have to redo it. I wonder what's going to happen to our dinosaurs. They seem to have held their form pretty well, pretty stable. So let's just see if we can get these out here. Oh dear. Oh, look at that. That's busting open here. So not a great success, all in all, day one. The thickness of the mold really is determining how they're holding up here and here, but obviously this is not a super successful experiment, and that's probably owed to my poor refrigeration. This is not the tour de force I was hoping it would be. These are closer to a jelly than to what we're looking for, so we're really going to have to increase the gelatin content there. You can see that. I'm going to take a bite out of this one and see how the bite is, and whether it tastes like a lolly. And I'm going to say no. That's my hypothesis.
No, don't do this.
Yeah, that wasn't my favorite thing that I've done, I must admit. That was unpleasant. And I was going to do a drop test.
So how would we say that went? Not perfectly. It turns out when you do these sorts of experiments as an adult, you decide, I have more important things to do in my life than make jelly dinosaurs. And that's a terrible thing, and you should never believe that. I should have picked up that there was a puddle forming in the bottom of my fridge. I still haven't quite figured out the mechanism for that, but it was sticky and gross. There is a pressure in science to publish only the things that go well. That's not actually the goal. The goal here is to figure out what works, and we're gonna stuff up. The important thing here is that I recognize that it is not likely to reflect the actual quality of each individual gelatin brand. I think there were also some problems with the way that my filming schedule worked, where I was taking it out of the freezer to film the next bit being poured in. I know that my freezer is a bit dodgy, but the good thing is we can accept failure and we can learn from it. I'm going to come up with some new tests, make up some more gelatin. The main thing is that I want to retest the dinosaur molds to actually see if the gelatin can set in it. I think it was in the first couple of days. I didn't get any footage of it, but it seemed just from an immediate finger pressure test that it was working. We'll see how we go with that. I'll check in a couple of days. So now we're working with our second test, and we're lining the inside of the tray with corn flour, cornstarch in other parts of the world, corn flour in Australia.
We're going to repeat the tests for each of these 5 middle components.
We also have controls at either end.
We've also lined all the molds with cornstarch. And hopefully that will address both of the problems. We will address inconsistency along the tray, and we will decrease sticking to the inside of the tray. And if we can have that be consistent, then we'll have a much more reliable test than we had the first time round.
So now we have to move the jelly from these containers into the tray. Normally we'd use a pipette to transfer liquid between two containers without disturbing their contents. Luckily, there's a place that sells pipettes near me.
This is a soy fish. Pushing it down pulls liquid into it.
So you can see that we're using this in the way that you would use a standard pipette, pushing it in to draw the liquid up into the vessel.
Important component of science. So here we go again. These are straight out of the freezer. Controls on either end. We form these ice crystals on top. Now this was a problem we had last time. Hopefully these are only applying to the top of the mold. I'm going to start off by comparing these two ends. If I apply too much force and they break, that's less of a problem with the controls. This end, they've all come out very cleanly. Not quite sure what's happened here. Still jelly, but just not set as firmly. I'm a bit worried that that's to do with how frozen these are and not actually how set they are as gelatin. So at the very least we have something to work with. It may not be exactly what we're hoping for. Starting to get a little softer, and I think that's because the main thing that's holding these together at this point is actually the fact that they are ice. But they certainly have some gelatin texture to them. Now I'm not going to be doing a bite test this time. So we'll start off just by doing a simple stab test of these here. So I'm not meeting much resistance there. Let's see here. Again, this is ice. As we try and see how solid this gelatin is very dependent on how frozen it remains. Now we need the drop test from a height of 30 centimeters. This is a crash test. Ugh. Now that is more rigid, but I think that's because it's ice. You can see that there's not much conclusive that we can tell. I think what we found is that I'm not even very good at making jelly. So the process of making a full jelly dinosaur is going to be quite difficult. Here are our molds. We've also redone these. Looking a little sturdier, but again, crystallizing a little bit more. There are these pockets of cornstarch here. But you can see that this actually comes away, and what we're left with is the actual gelatin. So if that hadn't frozen in that way, we could maybe conclude something about it. Oh, that's more promising. Hello, buddy. Oh, are we going to get dinosaur shapes here? This is not a complete failure. Quite icy. Set aside the ice part of it. This is a gelatin taking a shape. Now it's harder to identify what on earth these are meant to be. I think this is a parasaur hatching from an egg. Maybe that's the best test. It's just what do they actually look like now that they are things. Oh, those are identical. Basically exactly the same thing. Gosh, that's cold. As much as I'm a bit concerned with how everything's frozen up, I am pretty confident about the Brontosaurus. It's all holding together. I think we've actually picked one of the strongest ones we could have done. My hands are very, very wet. Once again, my freezer is just busted. Some of the things just completely freeze with crystals through them. Some things are barely even frozen at all. It's an inconsistent thing. So my freezer is unfortunately the weak link here. But what we can say is that our process worked. We determined that there was consistency along this line. We've determined that the cornstarch will allow things to come out of their molds. But what we may have to do is look for an alternative to gelatin we can set at room temperature.